Hey everybody, welcome back to Fighting Matters. I'm Steve Kwan from BJJ Mental Models, here with my boy Jesse Walker from Rough Hands BJJ.
What's up everybody? It's going great, glad to be here. Lots of stuff to talk about.
Man, we should talk about your gym. Talk about your gym. That's definitely newsworthy.
Yeah, well, we just moved to a new location, a new 6,000 square foot facility. A little down the road from where we were. Major upgrade. Dressing rooms and showers and weight rooms and 3 training rooms. The whole bit. It's super nice, and we're still getting used to it. It feels like we're undeserving of all the luxury.
Man, I am excited to see this at some point. As a Vancouver boy, 6,000 square feet sounds excessive. I mean, you got people up here who are cramming their gyms into 1,500 square feet, so that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's huge. Everybody that you'll like this. I cannot tell you how many people that walked in on Monday and today, and they're like, when do we get to have the next mental models camp? Can we do it next week? Like, they want to have a camp there so bad. So it's like, yeah, probably it's going to be April, but we'll do it.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot of topics to talk about. I mean, we had, I guess for the listeners' benefit, we had a bunch of episodes in the bank, and I still got a few left that we got to release. So we're always trying to get as much out as we possibly can, but we haven't recorded for about a week or so, which is a long time for Fighting Matters. And holy moly, has a lot of news broken in the last week. I don't even know if we can fit all of this stuff in one episode, but we had kind of 3 things that I guess we could bang off. Maybe if we start with the most jiu-jitsu related and then kind of graduate towards the least jiu-jitsu related. I guess the most jiu-jitsu related thing that we could talk about is our latest black belt and friend, Mr. Derek Moneyberg. Jesse, I published a short video on this. Now, something that occurs to me, and this has come up a few times. I think maybe we live so far into the bubble that we bring up this stuff, and people sometimes listen to this and they don't actually know what we're talking about. I had a few people talk about that when we were talking about like the Moneyberg promotion, and they said they had no idea who this guy even was. So Derek Moneyberg is one of these wealth influencer types. He, I guess, is best known for a kind of belligerent style of marketing where he basically insults people a lot and says like, you suck, you're dumb, you're bad at money. And he convinces them to sign up for his mastermind course or what have you and pay thousands of dollars to go sign up for it. And I mean, full disclosure, I've never signed up for one of this guy's courses. I'd never even heard of him before this jiu-jitsu thing had come up. But there have been a whole bunch of takedown pieces on him where they've kind of exposed the way that he runs these courses, and he's been accused of being kind of a scammer grifter type. And then he's lawyered up and gone after his critics, and it's just kind of an ongoing thing. So in the world of financial influencer types, he doesn't have the best reputation already. That in itself isn't relevant to us. What's more relevant is that he was recently awarded his jiu-jitsu black belt by Jake Shields. And notable here is the fact that he's only been training for about 3.5 years. So getting a black belt in 3.5 years in jiu-jitsu is not unheard of. It's not impossible. But you've got to be a pretty damn good grappler and a pretty damn devoted grappler to get a black belt that quick. I mean, when you talk about getting it in 3 years, you're putting yourself up there on the pedestal with folks like Travis Stevens or BJ Penn in terms of getting it super fast. I mean, my friend and yours, a member of the BJJ Mental Models community, Beatrice Jin, is basically like a full-time elite level grappler, one of the top-ranked women in the sport today at black belt. Yeah. And even she didn't get her black belt nearly that close. I mean, for her, it took her longer than that. And she still had people arguing, oh, well, is this too fast? So for someone who doesn't compete at all and is just a hobbyist to get a black belt in 3.5 years, it's not impossible. But the criticism has been around the way in which he's done it, right? So his take has been he trains basically entirely through private lessons. His whole thing is as a wealth influencer, he's trying to position himself as like this ultra wealthy, super rich, 1% of 1% type guy. And he's basically just exclusively trained through private lessons that he's got from folks like Jake Shields and Mikey Musumeci and a bunch of these others. And he's got lots of photos of them all wearing his Moneyberg merch. And this has resulted in a pretty significant backlash in the jiu-jitsu community. community, because you know how jiu-jitsu people are, right? I mean, there's a lot of things where jiu-jitsu people will maybe let it slide to their detriment. We've discussed this on the podcast. Maybe
Yeah.
our moral standards are sloppier than they should be in some areas. But one place where the community will never forgive you is if they think you're cheating on the belt system. So this guy has gotten an absolute ton of flack because of how quickly he got his belt. And I mean, look, I am in no position to judge this guy's technical ability. I've never rolled with him. There were a few clips that came out of him just kind of goofing around with technique. He certainly didn't look like a world beater, but again, like you can take a clip out of context and make anyone look bad in jiu-jitsu, especially when they're not rolling. If they're just in the gym drilling technique or kind of having someone talk them through something, everyone's going to look bad. So all of that, I give some degree of the benefit of the doubt to. But I published just a quick little mini hit on the podcast feed here for Fighting Matters, saying that my biggest problem is not whether he's the most legit or not. My bigger problem is, I mean, look, if you're associating and paying someone like Jake Shields, that's a problem to me more than anything else, because of what Jake Shields has become famous for after his combat sports career. So there's my kind of intro to the situation. And if we want to, we can expand on Jake Shields and his contributions to the fight community. But first, I'll turn this back to you, Jesse. You've probably been marinating on this for a week or two. What are your thoughts on this situation regarding Derek Moneyberg, or for that matter, just people arguably buying in black belts, right? What are your thoughts on something like that?
So I've heard a lot of takes over the last couple of weeks. I think yours, if I can boil it down, was you basically didn't give that much of a shit about it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, my thought is, I mean, look, you can. People have this weird perception of what a black belt is, that like a black belt should be someone who can wander into any tournament and compete at the highest level. The majority of black belts are just regular people, right? And most of them are not serious competitors. I mean, they're just people who do jiu-jitsu. Due to just availability bias, when we look in the media and we see the people who get coverage, it's usually the super elites. And so as a result, people get it into their head that, to be a good black belt, you should be able to go and hang with Gordon Ryan. And that's not a reasonable expectation. So the fact that this guy might be a subpar black belt, I don't think is the greatest sin that's ever been committed. I'm sure that there are a lot of gyms out there where you could find some old hobbyist black belt who would be a competitive role with Derek Moneyberg. And I don't think that is a knock against the sport, right? That's just, we cast a big tent in jiu-jitsu. And I think to some extent, that's a good thing. And as long as we've got some degree of standard around, what your knowledge is, I haven't seen enough to judge this guy. My bigger complaint about him is, first of all, if you take a look at the nature of the way that he's marketed himself, I don't think it's particularly the most ethical way to market a business. He's received a lot of pushback, regardless of his involvement in jiu-jitsu, just about the way he runs his business. And there is a concern that he might be trying to bring that approach and to start targeting and selling within the jiu-jitsu community, which would be a concern. But the bigger concern that I have is, look, I mean, this guy got his black belt from Jake Shields, right? I mean, first of all, if you want to criticize someone, criticize Jake Shields, the person who gave him his black belt, right? I mean, like, if this guy was able to convince someone to give him a black belt in 3.5 years, I think that says more about the coach than it does about him. But then you have to get in. Yeah, but then you have to get into what Jake Shields has become, right? I mean, Jake Shields at this point is recognized by the Anti-Defamation League as one of the most prominent, or at least one of the fastest growing anti-Semitic influencers out there. Jake Shields has said and done horrible things. I said this in kind of our mini episode, but if you haven't really been following Jake Shields' career post UFC, check out his Wikipedia page. There's some very enlightening things in there. And I know that sometimes on this show, you and I get accused of being like woke far lefties or whatever, but I think that any rational person should be able to look at that guy's Wikipedia page and say, this is bad taste. I mean, you're talking about a guy who has called for the sexual assault of women that he disagrees with. He has called for the public execution of doctors and lawyers who protect and support people in the transgender community. He is, as I mentioned, famous for leveraging anti-Semitism to grow his base over the last few years. I mean, at this point, Jake Shields is way more famous for being an anti-Semitic far-right influencer than he is for anything he did in the combat sport.
I don't think. I think last time I looked, Moneyberg is not a real last name. It is quite an anti-Semitic fake surname.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they're both in good company.
Well, this is another thing, right? I mean, I have never met Jake or Derek Moneyberg. I don't know why he does what he does, but I can tell you Moneyberg is not his last name. His real last name is something like Bukowski or something. I don't remember. But I will say this. If you're going to choose a name and you want to come across as a, big shot money influencer, I mean, okay, putting money in the name is one thing. Choosing a name like Moneyberg, which kind of sounds like a Jewish name. I mean, look, I could give that a pass in most cases, but when your running buddies are Jake Shields and you're a heavy Donald Trump supporter, it's not a good look to be choosing a last name that has the word money in it and sounds Jewish, right? Again, I don't know this guy. I can't project motives on him, but I can say it's a terrible look. If I were to do something like that, I would fully expect that people would come at me with all manner of criticism. It's just not a good look, right? And that's my take.
Yeah, but here's the thing. There is no shortage of assholes in jiu-jitsu. We were just having this conversation offline, right? So adding one more to the pile, I don't know really if it ripples the pond that much. I don't, seeing this article, I had a few thoughts on it. First was kind of like you. I don't care. I've got a school to run. I've got a family to raise. His black belt has nothing to do with me as an individual in or out of the sport. I just don't care. Again, I think it does say something potentially about the coaches that decided to award that to him. But the concern that it somehow dilutes my black belt and your black belt, because I'm sure you're happy to admit, like I am, I've met some really bad black belts over the years. There are probably a ton of people that would consider me one of them, and I'm okay with that too. So having one more in the tent with us just doesn't seem like a big deal to me, especially when he's got his own gig and he's got his financial stuff going on. That could have been a one and done thing. He could have made his little announcement that he got a jiu-jitsu black belt and we could have never heard from this guy again. I really don't think that he's planning on hitting the competitive scene hard. It doesn't sound like he's trying to open up a school and start awarding his own black belts. Like, I think this is a nothing burger. But it's really gotten a lot of people
It's technically a Moneyberg, not a nothing burger.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, this just, I don't really understand why it, a lot of people are having some really big feelings about it, and I'm not quite clear whether it has more to do with them or him.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like you said, look, I'm not worried about whether this guy getting a black belt is going to, cast aspersions on my black belt. I'm more than able to do that on my own, to my own black belt. I don't need someone else to make me look bad. And I mean, old guys will understand, right? All of these young guys are talking about, like, to get a black belt, you must be at the highest levels. And man, you know what? You're going to be 50 one day, buddy. We're all going to get here, and you're going to be a 50-year-old black belt, and some 20-year-old who is like taking TRT 30 years before he needs it is going to wrestle fuck you into the ground. And, it's going to happen to all of us. It's the circle of life, right? Having a black belt does not mean you are this unstoppable killing machine.
Forever. In
forever,
perpetuity.
Anyway. Yeah. And so if this guy is, and look, the argument that Mikey Musumeci and some of these others made to defend this guy is, look, they claim this guy has an unworldly level of knowledge in jiu-jitsu. And I mean, I can't prove that one way or the other. It is not my place to call bullshit on Mikey Musumeci as to how to gauge someone's jiu-jitsu quality.
Sure.
I understand though, that of course this reflects very badly on Mikey, unfortunately, someone that I'd always really look positively upon, but it's not a good look for him. With Jake Shields and Frank Mir and some of these other guys, you look at them and you're like, okay, I can understand how you guys could get sucked into this Derek Moneyberg vortex, but Mikey Musumeci is a little bit disappointing that he's out there standing for this guy. I really hope that when Mikey says that this guy is actually deserving of a black belt, that is his true perception. And I hope that we're all proven wrong and Mikey is proven right, because you know how the internet community is, right? You make one big mistake with your reputation and it is forever tarnished.
Well, yes, but I mean, Mikey's also now carrying water for the UFC, which is also not a great look. So, you know, again, we can't necessarily attribute, intention on everything everyone does, but there seems to be a pattern with Mikey right now too that maybe is not headed in a great direction, for whatever the motivations are.
My biggest fear, because I see this very often with especially young jiu-jitsu bros, is when they get a taste of that internet hate for the first time, it tends to further radicalize them in the other direction. I mean, this is, I think, very much what happened to Joe Rogan. I think that a big part of why he moved to support Trump was just because he was kind of tired of getting constant shit from the left, which is I don't agree with his decision, but I understand it, right? I mean, you and I have been on the receiving end of internet hate and we're nobodies. So I can only imagine that Mikey Musumeci, who's a young, impressionable guy who just wants to do his best, getting hate mail for every single thing you do at some point is going to push you in the other direction. I hope he's able to. Yeah, I hope he's able to keep to a strong moral compass about this, and I hope that he really does believe and is proven right that this guy deserved his black belt. But again, when you've got one of the most notorious anti-Semitic, Jew-hating conspiracy theorists giving someone a black belt, if your biggest problem is whether he's giving out the belt too quickly, that to me is a mismatch of priorities, right? We should be much more concerned. We should be much more concerned about the person giving the belt. But that's what I think about that. How about
well, and it goes into it goes kind of back to something that we continue to hit on in the show and we talk about offline all the time, is the fact that that is what this conversation is about, rather than who is awarding the black belt, normalizes Jake Shields and his behavior and all the nonsense that comes out of his mouth. That to me is the story way more than Moneyberg. I'm telling you, I mean, I feel like the community has already kind of chased him away, but he's going to be a non-issue. Jake's still around and will continue to be part of the community. That's what we need to be dealing with.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that topic of normalizing hate is the other thing I wanted to get your opinion on while we're here today. As we're running through current events, I don't know if you saw the recent Jubilee debate with Mehdi Hassan. Have you heard about this?
I have. I've seen a few reels and a few clips. I have not been able to sit down and watch the whole thing, but it looks wildly entertaining.
It's something else. Okay, so I'm trying to do my best to give people the news briefing here because apparently we don't do that enough. So there is a very popular YouTube channel called Jubilee or something to that effect. And they're kind of famous for doing these like debates where it's you ever seen any of those like wild and wacky crazy MMA fights they do in Russia where it's like, what if we did a 10-on-10 MMA fight and there's just total chaos and madness?
Right.
They basically do this but for things like debates. So they'll be like, let's have a bunch of anorexic people debate a bunch of obese people. I don't really know what this achieves, but it's the thing they do and they get a lot of attention out of it.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, when you want to do debates like this, stirring it up along political lines is one of the easiest things to do. And they've done this in the past. They've had, Sam Cedar come on and debate like far right people and stuff and whatever. But they did one recently with Mehdi Hassan, who is the journalist and the founder of Zateo, which is a rapidly growing kind of progressive media outlet. And they marketed it as, Mehdi Hassan takes on 20 far-right conservatives. He's debating them all. And so he comes in and he's got some talking points about things he wants to prove. And it's, his stance is stuff like Donald Trump is violating the Constitution. Immigrants are actually good for society. He's having a debate. And look, if a traditional far-right conservative wanted to show up and debate that, fair play. But what wound up happening is Jubilee surrounded this guy by 20 of the most ridiculous, like far-right fascist lunatics I can think of. And calling these people far right is actually kind of unfair because when you think of far right, you think of someone who at least still fits within the standard political spectrum. But what wound up happening was he was in a room debating people who were just straight up arguing and saying that, like, I believe in a Christian autocracy. I believe that the government should be overthrown and replaced by a religious dictatorship that is on my side. And I'm okay with that because I know they're not going to hurt me. They're going to hurt the other people. And this is not me paraphrasing, really. This is pretty close.
No, I mean, this is pretty close line for line. Yeah.
Yeah. And there were other people he was supposedly debating and who were just straight up telling him, you weren't born here. Get out of my country. I don't want you here, which is a wild thing to say in a debate. And there's a few problems with this. First of all, I'm not sure yet if Mehdi Hassan actually knew what he was getting into here. It kind of feels like he might have been jumped a little bit. They thought he was going in for a regular debate, and instead they surrounded him by 20 Nazis. But the bigger problem I have is, like, what does this really achieve, right? Is there any value in debating someone whose whole stance is, I want to replace our democracy with a religious dictatorship? My argument would be that probably does more harm than good, because it just normalizes that opinion and makes it look like that viewpoint has some sort of merit, where it really does not. When you take someone whose viewpoint is, I believe in democracy, and you have them debate someone whose viewpoint is, I believe in a religious dictatorship and people like you should be kicked out of the country, I don't think you can have a good faith definition about that, because we're just not even agreeing on basic human decency at that point. And if you put those two people in a room together and ask them to debate, you're kind of making the far right extremist look way more normal than they really ever should. I grew up in a time when we still had people who survived the Holocaust and weren't that old. I remember there were people who were, I think, relatively young into the senior citizen years, coming into my high school or my middle school and showing me the tattoos that they got at their arms in the concentration camps and saying, this is what they did to us. So I grew up in a time where we still had people with firsthand knowledge of that advocating for this. And there was no question that these people have no place in society when it comes to these extremists. They have no place in society. You don't sit down at a table with them and debate whether there's merit in putting people in concentration camps. You do any of that, and you're just giving legitimacy to these hateful beliefs. The way that you deal with that kind of hate is you stamp it out. You give it no oxygen. So I have a problem, I think, with these debates, because what winds up happening is you've got this one dude getting shouted down by 20 Nazis or fascists. And I don't really think that, even if you have the best of intentions of trying to, make these people look like fools, I think all you do is you give them a platform they wouldn't otherwise have. And now a lot of impressionable young men who don't understand the nuances of an intellectual debate, all they see is 20 white dudes yelling at a brown person. Right. And I don't think that's a good look. I don't think that is going to get the point across in any sort of productive way. But what do you think, Jesse? I mean, again, I can't bring myself to watch this whole thing, but I've certainly seen the highlights and they disturb the hell out of me.
Yeah. So I think I mostly agree with you. I have a pretty healthy tension. I do about a lot of things, but I have a pretty healthy tension here when thinking about this, because I do still believe that bad speech is best combated through more good speech, rather than trying to block the bad speech and the bad thoughts. I still, at some level, do believe in this kind of marketplace of ideas. But even just numerically, like you were talking about, right? It was 20 versus 1. And it was not treated, at least it was not edited in a way, from what I saw, where it was trying to play the both sides game, which is a real problem in our media right now, because we're trying to deal with both sides, where one of the sides is just absolutely batshit crazy. The other one's a little batshit crazy, but in a different and more benign way, in my opinion. But this still was like overwhelmingly just crazy speech. And, we've talked about this, we're always the old guys. There used to be like one of these crazy guys in a town that would hang out drunk at a bar, and he would be exposed to just a very small number of people. And now we're living in a world where that nut job gets platformed to millions of people. I mean, I can't imagine anybody that's been on YouTube in the last week that has not been pushed this clip through the algorithm, right? Just about everybody's seen it. That to me is a problem, because that means that even if it's just algorithmically, these ideas are being promoted. And I don't know that there is, I think because of its sensational nature, the crazy speech, even in those clips, outweighed Mehdi's kind of reasoned debate with the craziness. So it was just crazy, crazy, crazy because it's getting good views and it's getting promoted and all of this. And so if you've got kind of at-risk people that are kind of teeter-tottering on the edge anyway, and seeing these people celebrate and be proud of all this crazy shit that's coming out of their mouth, it could have bad outcomes. So, it's a tricky problem for sure. I'm uncomfortable with it. I wish there was a way that we could have those conversations. But again, I don't know that you can have conversations like that when we don't have a shared set of values. I don't know that you could have a debate like that in good faith. When one person's like, hey, I don't think we should throw brown people in cells and not allow them to see lawyers and send them to countries that aren't even their own. And the other person's like, fuck it, let's do whatever we want to them. Set them on fire, whatever it is. I don't know how you have that debate because we are operating at very, very different levels of value, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a great point about, and I mean, we've talked about this before about free speech, and I agree that we need to have a marketplace of ideas, and people have the right to speak their mind, but it's like you said, back in the day, there would be that one crazy person in town, maybe someone on the subway would tell you that, hey, Jesus is coming back and he's actually a green alien and he's going to take us all off to Nirvana in the sky or something. And you could just say, whatever, buddy, crazy guy, and just move on. You wouldn't give that guy a television show to espouse his ideas, right? It's one thing to say everyone has free speech. It's another thing to say, well, hold on, this guy's saying something crazy. I bet if we put that on TV, we'd get a lot of eyeballs and a lot of
ratings will go through the roof, right?
Yeah, which is what it feels like happens now. I mean, if people want to espouse these crazy, hateful things, it really should be something that gets slapped down and we all move on pretty quickly. We shouldn't be trying to figure out, like, how can we monetize this outrage? I mean, as an example, that clip with Mehdi Hassan, the 20 guys that he debated, apparently, and I didn't see this myself, but I heard that, in the YouTube video, that when they published that, which was seen by millions of people, they linked out to all of those far-right people to help promote their Instagrams or their social. So it's like, you're just helping these people find an audience now, right? All that's going to happen is these people are going to become heroes to the other extremists, and it's going to enable them to monetize this. And we're already seeing this because one of those dudes, the guy who was like a big fan of he's a big fan of like famous Nazis, and he wanted to displace democracy with a Christian dictatorship. He lost his job for saying that, and now he's running some sort of fundraiser and he's collecting money in exchange. Which just the sheer hilarity of someone coming on saying, I'm a far right person, I don't believe in socialism. And then when they experience the consequences of their action and they have to go and beg the community for socialist money to pay the bills. I mean, it's kind of funny in that way, but
when I guarantee he will make a tremendous amount of money off this.
Yeah. Oh, he will. Yeah, he absolutely will. Right. Because the kind of people who share that kind of hateful rhetoric and belief, they have found a new martyr. They found a new person that they can rally behind, and he's probably going to have a podcast, and he's probably going to get some sort of deal, and he's going to probably be, even if he got fired from this, probably going to be way better off at the end of the day than he ever would otherwise. I mean, look at freaking Kyle Rittenhouse, right? I mean, that guy.
Exactly.
I mean, he's built a whole career around the fact that, he was engaged in a shooting. And, you can debate the ethics of the situation. I fully understand that it was not exactly cut and dry in that situation because the people that were attacking him were also in the wrong. But at the end of the day, he monetized this whole thing and built a whole career out of it. And is that what we want? Do we really want to create a world where by saying and doing this crazy extreme shit, you get given a platform and you get financial opportunities? Because that seems to be what we're doing.
Well, and I mean, that's the weird thing, right? Is even that kind of stuff, we make jokes about late stage capitalism, but like that's kind of where we are. We, not that we haven't always made money on the backs of other people suffering, but this is wild that like there's just these ivory tower CEOs just that has this algorithm that keeps pushing this stuff because that the sensationalism and the outrageousness is what's making them money. It's what's selling ads, and it's what's doing that, this and that. And again, when it's always about profit and making sure that, we're keeping our shareholders happy, values and ethics and morals just end up going out the window. I think a lot of, not that I'm necessarily, I'm a big fan of, capitalist models in some markets. But I think it has to be mediated, because allowing this kind of stuff is going to end up crashing the plane anyway. It's a real problem, and I don't think we are doing anything to address it as a community. Certainly, the tech companies aren't. They don't have any interest in it. They're just printing money. So I wish we as a community, as a nation, as a world, could come together and kind of figure out a better way to do this stuff.
And I mean, we haven't even talked about the Josh Saunders situation as a group, right? I shot a quick reaction video to that, but this is all very relevant to jiu-jitsu because we're seeing the same thing in our sport where the take of a lot of people promoting these fight sports is, well, let's get in people who can bring in eyeballs, regardless of how they do it. I mean, the perfect example, and this we did talk about, was Bryce Mitchell going on a Hitler apologist spree. And Dana White condemned him to his credit, but then refused to punish him. And his response was, well, he's got free speech. And we've already talked and established about why that's not a valid excuse to platform a Nazi. But he said he's got free speech. And hey, you know what? If you got a problem with it, good news is you can watch him get his face punched in then at the next UFC fight. Well, all you're saying there is that you're basically monetizing a Nazi, right? You're using people who say and do terrible things to get attention so that you can sell a fight. And I understand that the fight game has always been gross, but there's got to be a line to the ethics with which we draw this, right? I mean, if your entire idea for marketing a pay-per-view is we're going to get a Nazi on the card in the hopes that maybe someone punches him and knocks him out, and that will make people want to pay. Like at that point, you've really crossed the Rubicon in terms of what's ethical, because you're, regardless of whether Bryce Mitchell wins or loses, you're now creating massive financial opportunities for people like that. You're normalizing the hateful stuff that he said, and you're sending a message to other people who share those beliefs that, oh, the UFC is open for business if you're a far-right Nazi, right? And that just means you're going to have more and more and more of these guys coming in, which is already happening. And in our sport, we recently had Josh Saunders go down the exact same road.
Yeah, that's right. And, I don't know if this is a callback or a call forward. I don't know if the episode's been released, but, we just talked about this with the WWE. But that's kind of fake, right? You've got an opportunity to go see good guys beat up bad guys. It's called the WWE, right? It may be theatrical, but you can go see that. You can go watch a movie and go watch, but we don't need to be doing this in real life. We should have some ethics and some morals about who we are letting represent our brands, our platforms, our whatever. But continuing to let our algorithms or whatever else prop these people up it's just not a good look for any of us.
And it gets complicated too, because unfortunately in our sport, as we've talked about many times, this is a sport that is increasingly becoming a recruitment ground for straight up neo-Nazi extremists. I mean, we've talked about this. We did that episode on active clubs with Mac Lamoureux a while back, and I am really happy to see that since we did that episode, this has kind of exploded in coverage. It's been all over the news. Finally,
we've seen a lot of articles.
Yeah, finally people are starting to bring attention to this because it is a much bigger problem than people think. When we published that episode, I think people thought, well, there's only probably like 5 gyms in the States that are like this. No, there's a lot more than that. There's a lot more. And it started to be covered by, The Guardian, and up here in Canada, CBC. It's getting a lot more exposure, thankfully, because unfortunately a lot of gyms are using martial arts as a recruitment ground to bring in these people. And in a world where it's harder and harder to find third place communities where we all get together. This gives, people who are part of like the Patriot Front and these neo-Nazi groups a really great opportunity to recruit impressionable young men, right? Because they don't, I mean, rightly or wrongly, we don't have a lot of like community get-togethers or events anymore. So much of what we do is remote. It's online. I think there's a strong argument to be made that we need to revive our sense of community if we want to really fix a lot of the problems in society. I think the martial arts are a great opportunity for people to do that, to create positive outreach communities. And there's a lot of people who do that through the martial arts. But unfortunately, you also have these active clubs who are finding impressionable young men who feel like the world is against them, and they're teaching them to fight and to defend themselves. And then they're using this as a pipeline to recruit them to some really heinous stuff. And that is a huge problem, right? And that, much like, Jake Shields, that reflects very badly on all of us, because now we're going to get painted with that brush of, hey, are you training that crazy Nazi sport that I keep hearing about on the news? I don't want that label on me, right? So, and I know that a lot of gym owners feel like, well, I'll just keep my head down and I'll just ignore this. It doesn't concern me. But man, that's how these people get a foothold, is they're permitted because no one pushes back and resists.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's something as a school owner I think about all the time, between, all the far-right ideology stuff just burying itself in our industry, all of the sexual abuse and misconduct scandals that have been going on. There can only be so much of that before it starts impacting us all. And that's not even necessarily school owners, but, you go into your workplace and, I train, you should come do BJJ with me. Oh, you mean the Nazi sport? Like, it's eventually going to come back to bite us all in the ass, even if we're not all on board with it. This is something that really, without qualification, needs to be resisted on all fronts. This kind of infiltration that's happening right now has to be stopped. And on all of those fronts, or we're not really going to have a sport to be our third place, as Steve was just talking about. We're going to lose it if we do not start fighting now.
I mean, probably the most relevant example, and ironically, it was people on the right who championed this, was, if you remember, back in the very early days of the UFC, MMA was extremely stigmatized. Or you remember, I think it was John McCain called it human cockfighting, right? And
yeah.
And in fairness,
he wasn't wrong.
No, he wasn't entirely wrong. But that was a stigma that even after trying to clean up their act, MMA carried for years, and it bled over to jiu-jitsu. I mean, for the longest time, I was talking to Brianna St. Marie, right, one of the top women in the world, and she was pointing out that, like, over in Montreal, for the longest time, Brazilian jiu-jitsu was not allowed. Like, jiu-jitsu competitions were not allowed in her province. And that's because they were too tangentially related to MMA. So they got painted with the same brush. It wasn't that long ago that MMA was illegal in New York as well. That was one of the last states to finally legalize it. And, credit to Dana and the UFC, they put a lot of effort into trying to legitimize their sport. They really, really went above and beyond to try to clean up the sport and make it something legitimate. And I think in jiu-jitsu, if we want to actually see this thing expand and grow, we can't be portrayed as a Nazi sport. And at the bare minimum, that means when Nazis start wandering in your gym, you have to say, get the fuck out. You can't sit there and say, oh, well, we're welcoming of all beliefs, even people whose beliefs involve the extermination of the other 50% of our gym, where we don't want to get involved in people's politics. You can't pull that shit. Like, it should not be, it doesn't take a lot of balls to say, hey, I don't think that, hateful extremists should be allowed in my gym. I don't want people here who wish for the death and murder and disenfranchisement of my other students. That should not be a hard stance to take. But yet you hear a lot of people say, like, oh, well, that's politics. We can't talk about that in the gym.
Well, it shouldn't be, unless, and, we're starting to see this too, right? It's like, it's not just the students coming in that feel this way. It's the instructors, it's the coaches, it's the school owners. And a lot of them are, in my opinion, abusing their stature, their power in that student-teacher relationship where we've got a floor full of impressionable people that listen and hang on every word that you say. If you start bringing in hateful rhetoric, bullshit speech, that starts to have that impact. So I would also say to the students, not just the school owners, that we have to resist it. Students, if you're feeling like you're being put in positions, go somewhere else. There are other options out there. But this has to be resisted.
And I think that's a good point, that students have the ability to push back too. The nice thing about 2025 is, in most places, you no longer have that problem where there's only one jiu-jitsu in a 100-mile radius, only one
Right.
jiu-jitsu gym. You can probably find another gym. It used to be the case that there would be, one gym in your city if you're lucky. That's not the case now. If your gym doesn't work, you can probably find another one. It's funny, I saw a thread on Reddit just yesterday where someone posted something to the effect of like, I'm thinking of leaving my gym. My instructor is a real a-hole and he yells at his students and he doesn't care about them and he sexually harasses all of the women. Do you think I should go to another gym or stick it out? It's like, what the fuck? What kind of question is that? That's an idiotic question. There's only one right answer to that, and that is to leave. Why are we even debating this? I mean, if you're willing to look past that, what does that say about you? Jeez, why are you...
But let's break that down, because I think that is the exact same thing that we are seeing on the far right, especially in the MAGA world. Right? Is even if you are not completely on board with everything that's being done and being said, you are in a community that has accepted you, and that student from Reddit may be in the same boat of like, I'm having to give up a community. I'm having to give up friends. I'm having to give up a routine because somebody else is being an asshole. And I can imagine that could be really hard for some people. I mean, I've known a lot of people over the years that have stayed at some really awful gyms for what on the outside looks like a really stupid reason. But when you really kind of get into it, it could be something like, man, but I'm really close to getting my purple belt, and I don't want to have to start over and prove myself with another coach, right? And again, when you and I are saying that seems like a silly thing. But when you have a lot of your identity wrapped up in all this time that you've invested in this sport and this advancement, that could be a hard thing to walk away from. I mean, I can tell I've got a personal story about that. 2 days before I was about to get my black belt, my coach said something horribly racist and homophobic. And I knew we weren't perfectly aligned politically, and I knew one day it might be a problem, but I was right there on the spot, put in a position of like, holy shit, what do I do with this? Do I walk away now and start over? Do I ignore it? Right? And I kind of took a middle path. But in some ways that's relatable to me. I can understand how that can be a hard decision when you don't have a really good outside perspective.
And I mean, it's especially important to bring up too, that for many people, jiu-jitsu may be their career or their desired career. If you are 25 years old and you want to be a world champion, and that's kind of your goal in life, and you feel like maybe you've only got a few more years to make that happen, and you're a purple or a brown belt, I mean, switching gyms could set your promotion path back 2 or 3 years, because your new coach, whoever they may be, is going to want to kind of assess you from the ground up. They're not going to just throw a belt at you for coming in the door. So we do have to bear in mind that for some people it's more than just a moral stand to switch their gyms. It could have serious financial detriment to them, or career detriment, if jiu-jitsu is how they want to make a living. And that doesn't even get into social control and the kind of cult-like tactics that get deployed by organizations like this. You brought up, just from even if it's not completely rational, from a social standpoint, it's very hard to walk away from your tribe. And a lot of malicious coaches will exploit that. Like if you've ever had to sit in a room and
Absolutely.
hear, I mean, I've been in those classes where the black belt gave us a lecture about the importance of loyalty. So I know exactly where this all goes. But that's still very much a common thing, right? Black belts and coaches often will make it very hard, whether they're doing it consciously or not, for students to leave and to live their morals. That's a big problem in the sport. And I think we have to acknowledge, too, that it's not easy for students to walk away. You see this a lot with cults. You look at this and you're like, how you knew that this place was abusing you. Why did you not just walk away from the cult? Well, it's really easy to say that when you're just watching a documentary about this cult on YouTube. But when you're in there and you've invested 10 years of your life into this cult and
Man, it's tough.
yeah, they've supplanted your family and they're threatening you if you leave, you know, it is not easy to walk away. And I've seen this in jiu-jitsu too, where people have walked away and their former gym would kind of stalk them and punish them and make their lives incredibly difficult after the fact. So I don't downplay how hard it is and how courageous it is to walk away from a bad gym sometimes.
But you have our support. That's what we want. We're in this with you. Let's fight. If you need help finding a new gym, let us know. Reach out. We'll do everything we can. We have friends everywhere.
Yeah,
right, Steve?
I got that on a shirt recently from Andor. I have friends everywhere. But yes, I mean, I've been doing this for years since we started covering cult stuff and cult tactics on BJJ mental models. Yeah, if you are in this perspective and you want someone as a sounding board, first of all, to figure out like, am I in a cult? Because that's usually the first question.
Right.
And then what do I do about it? If you don't have someone to talk to about that and you want just a confidential sounding board, just DM us, right? I'm always happy to answer your questions and to give some perspective, because sometimes people, you know, they misread the situation. Sometimes it's not as bad as maybe it feels in the moment, but sometimes it's real bad. Like I've
way worse than you understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem is once a coach or a gym leader starts pushing the boundaries a bit and they get away with it, and they realize they can exert more control, they're just going to keep asking for more and more. And often it starts with, you know, the coach just being a bit unreasonable. But after a few months, they've got you like cooking dinners for them and, you know, paying them, you know, a freaking stipend out of your paycheck. This is how cults start, right? And the more that people go along with it, the more it emboldens the cult leader to do it even more. So, and that makes it even harder for people to get out. Something else I wanted to talk about as we close here, and this is not directly jiu-jitsu related, but I think we can draw some parallels. You talked earlier about the abuse of power. And another big thing that's come up in the news and is still breaking right now is the revival of the zombie Jeffrey Epstein case, right? The guy who just won't die. I mean, I'm hesitant to even talk about this because anything related to this news story changes on a minute-by-minute basis. I mean, if I go and I publish this episode right after recording it, the story could have already changed by then. But, you know, we've seen some disturbing shit. We already, of course, know what Jeffrey Epstein has done. We know what his compatriots have done. We know that Donald Trump has been in that circle. But since then, it seems like every day more and more of this comes out. You know, at first, the Trump administration went from, we've got the files on our desk and we're going to release them imminently, to there are no files. They don't want it. This is a Democrat witch hunt. We don't need to release it. And now we're seeing these weird, creepy love letters that Trump has penned to Jeffrey Epstein. And on top of that, it sounds like the FBI had been directed to do a massive analysis and work 24 hours around the clock to flag every occurrence of Trump's name in these files. And it just, I mean, who knows what's going to happen at this point, but it just seems like this thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And although it's not specifically jiu-jitsu related, I think there are some parallels that we can draw in terms of abuse of power and abuse of culture. I mean, probably the closest parallel is the fight sport situations with Cyborg from a few years ago, which are still being litigated today. You know, a lot of his victims have still not gotten justice from that. But it's the same thing, you know, right? You get this powerful guy with a cult of personality, and it's amazing how hard it is to get justice. I often see people when you know, a woman comes forward with accusations, there's immediately going to be people who jump on her statement and say like, well, how can we trust you? How do we know you're not just doing this for attention? It's so hard for women to get justice on this kind of thing. And the Epstein case is a great example of that, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's getting flagged now that, you know, there were people back in the 90s who were saying, you need to look into Donald Trump because I was harassed by Epstein. I was abused by Epstein, and Trump was there or involved or aware of the situation somehow. And it doesn't look like much came of it, right? And so it really does raise the question of why is it so hard to get justice on things like these? Why do these powerful pricks keep getting away with this stuff?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? And I mean, it probably always boils down to power and money. It's I will let them remain anonymous. But while we were recording, I just got a text from a very high level individual in the jiu-jitsu community that is now predicting. So we can call this a prediction. Look back on it later. That Trump is going to give Maxwell a pardon with the agreement that she goes in front of Congress and only names Democrats and enemies of Trump as people involved in the whole mess. So we'll see if that comes to pass. But for me, I mean, it goes back everything that we've talked about today, right? Is none of this is normal. It's not normal to have Nazis infiltrating a sport. It's not normal to get a black belt in 3.5 years from a Nazi apologist. It is not normal for someone like Jeffrey Epstein and, as he's been accused, Donald Trump, to get away with the horrific and heinous things that they got away with. And I say got away with, I mean Epstein died in prison. And I'll leave it at died. Whether it was suicide or not is, beyond my purview. But for all intents and purposes, the victims didn't get any justice. And that's a real problem. And it speaks to, why people, when people ask, why don't you come forward? Why don't you report this? Why don't you tell somebody other than me? This is why. Not only are there often no repercussions for the perpetrator, there's horrible repercussions for the accuser. To the point of some of these women have gotten disappeared over the years. So it is completely unsurprising. It's terribly disappointing, but completely unsurprising to me that we are in the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah. And this is the thing that really kind of irks me is when this happens and accusations come forth, people will so readily jump to the defense of the accused without any context at all. And again, jiu-jitsu is such a breeding ground for this. You see this all the time where some popular figure, charismatic figure in the sport will be accused of something. And without any details about who did what, people in the comments, random people will jump in and just slander the shit out of the victim or the accuser, right? And look, I mean, do false accusations happen? Statistically speaking, it does, but it's very, very rare compared to the number of times that an accusation actually bears weight. And the reason why, as you mentioned, is because the social, emotional, and financial toll that it takes on the accuser is massive, right? People don't just throw out these accusations because they want attention. The amount of shit that you have to go through if you want to put out a public accusation, it is very hard. And if you've ever met someone who's done this before, then you know this, right? You will have seen it firsthand, the toll that it takes on them. Claudia Duvall, after she accused Ricardo De La Riva of sexual abuse, she was subject to so much hate from his fans that for a while she was afraid to leave her house. Right. And all she did was speak out. And that is, I don't think I mean, if we want to talk about how we're all big, strong, alpha, manly men and how, we train jujitsu so that we can be, combat lions and protect the innocent. Like, you got to start by actually protecting the innocent. When a woman or a person who is otherwise vulnerable speaks out and says something bad happened to me, you have to defend their ability to plead their case. That doesn't mean that you automatically assume the other person is guilty. I mean, we've got due process, but if you immediately jump on that person and try to slander their reputation just because you're a fan of the accused's jiu-jitsu, that's kind of fucked up. And we see that way too often in the sport to this day, right? I mean, to this day, this is one of the grossest things about jiu-jitsu. I mean, probably the largest scale coverage jiu-jitsu has ever gotten was when it made the New York Times because Roberto Cyborg Abro was in the news for, because his gym basically had systemic issues with women getting sexually assaulted under his label and his alleged involvement in suppressing that. That's not a good look again for our sport. And we can all say like, oh, well, that's not our problem. I only care about the things that affect me directly, but this does affect you, right? If this becomes even more of a gutter sport and this becomes what the sport gets known for, then it's going to affect you by reputation, and you should care about that, right?
Well, and I think the other thing to really be aware of, frequent guest to the show, Shelby has really taken on the mantle of, I don't know of another name for it, but kind of being the sin eater of the jiu-jitsu community, and the literal hundreds of women that have privately messaged her anonymously to tell their stories. And it's one of the downsides of this stuff not getting reported is that I don't think people really understand the scale of the problem. But the stories and the accusations, under the promise of anonymity, is so staggering. The number of nights that Shelby and I have had to go to bed just feeling sick at the stuff that we've heard and we've read, it's hard to overstate it. Yeah.
I mean, the example I can give is when the cyborg thing happened, we did a podcast on this with Emily Kwok and Dominica Oblanite, and they kind of shared their stories. And of course, they're, very high profile in the sport. And after that, they got a ton of messages just like what you did, which is people basically saying, thank you for speaking out. This also happened to me. I wasn't able to speak publicly like you did. Here's my story. And God, we had to have like a private therapy session over this because some of the stories that people wrote in were just like, I mean, they will turn your stomach. They will turn your stomach, right? Especially once you start to realize that these are probably people that you know and maybe even look up to that did this stuff, right? Once you kind of realize how prevalent this is, it really turns your stomach. And the only reason this doesn't get a lot more exposure than it does is because the penalty to women for speaking up about this is so massive. It's so massive that for many women, it's less painful to just not say anything and just endure this, which is absolutely wrong, right? And again, I never would have believed this. I also thought that this was not that big a deal and, whatever, it happens, but it's not that huge a thing. And, that's just life. And then I saw it once I started training jiu-jitsu, I started seeing this happen to my friends and I started hearing their stories. And once I started reporting on their stories, I started hearing about other people's stories. And you realize really quickly once you start talking about it that this is not a small problem. And the more people who talk about it openly, the easier it gets for everyone else to. That's an important thing too. People always say whenever we do a talk like this, I always get feedback from people that say things like, Steve, this is great. But I wish that you could put women on the panel to talk about this. And I do too. I absolutely do too. But I can tell you sometimes it's easier for them to go through people like us, right? Because the consequences to me saying this are a lot less than the consequences of a woman speaking out about what happened to her personally.
Well, but the other thing, Steve, that strikes me about that kind of position, although yes, I do wish that we could get more of them speaking, this is not their problem. This is our problem as men. We need to be part of the solution because we are the ones causing the fucking problem. And that even means the people that are overlooking, are apologizing, are ignoring, that all that shit has to stop. We have got to deal with this problem. It is not getting better. It's getting worse. And we have got to go to bat for that other half of the population. We need them on the mats. They probably need to be there more than we do. And
selfishly speaking, if your gym is all dudes, you can double your customer base if you can convince women to train there. But that's only going to happen if they feel safe.
And you know what? Actually, I've done some research on this. It is more than double because they tend to bring in more referrals. They are word of mouth advertisers for you. A single female student is worth more than a male student at your school. So even if it's just a money issue for you, it makes sense to have them on the mat.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's well said. I mean, I can vouch for that too. People often ask me, why is it that BJJ Mental Models has access to all of these incredible female athletes, and why so many? Right? Because most podcasts, maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 15 of their guests will be a woman, and for me, it's like feels like 6 out of 10 sometimes. It's like a ladies podcast practically, and it's not intentional. It's because if I put forth a product that speaks to them and gives them a voice, they'll tell their friends, right? And next thing you know, I'm getting a ton of referrals like, hey, you should get this person on the podcast. And it has been so valuable to support the women in the jiu-jitsu community because it's paid back for me a millionfold. Not even because I was necessarily trying to, but because if they felt like this was a good place where they could congregate, they will advertise it on my behalf, which is fantastic. And so, I mean, just purely, even if you put aside the ethics, just from a pure financial, capitalist, self-greed motivation situation, it is in your benefit to protect the women in your gym. And I guess one last thing that I want to dig up there is you talked about how it's our problem, right? Like we need to do something about this. And a lot of guys will push back on that. They'll say like, excuse me, Jesse, excuse me, Steve, I didn't do this. I didn't sexually harass anyone. Don't you be casting that evil on me, right? And that's fair, right? It's absolutely true that you as a man are not responsible for the sins of all other men. That is true. And it's unfair to cast people with that brush. But if we just consider the sheer reality of this situation, let's say that 1 in 100 men are predators. And that's a very generous estimate. I am certain the number is much higher than that. But let's say for argument's sake, 1 in 100 men are predators. 2 things to bear in mind. Number one, that does not mean that a woman has a 1 in 100 chance of being abused. The chance is much, much higher because every one of those dudes is going to punch above their weight from a creep standpoint. It's not like they only prey on one woman, right? Every one of those dudes, if you've ever met any of these people, they will creep on every single woman who is like within a 10-foot radius and has a pulse. And even those two are not necessarily required sometimes. So the end result is, okay, maybe only 1 in 100 of these men are creeps. But the net result of that is that pretty much every woman is going to repeatedly get exposed to these people. And it would also kind of like be saying, hey, Jesse, I'm going to give you a bag of potato chips. You like potato chips, right? One of them is poisonous and will kill you. Have fun. Are you going to eat that bag of potato chips? Probably not, right? So when you start talking to women who train in the sport and you realize very quickly they want to be a part of this. They want to engage with their brothers in the sport. But they always have to have their guard up because they never know which one of those guys is the 1 in 100. There's no way for them to know. And so they always have to have their guard up. And whether you are that creepy dude or not, you are getting painted with that brush because a woman has to protect herself. And the best way that you can solve that problem is to be on her side and to advocate, not just to try to peace out and say like, not my problem, not my business, but to actively get involved and demonstrate that you're one of the good guys. That is the best way that you can make the sport better for everyone.
I also poo-poo that argument a little bit about it not being your problem because almost all of you have moms, sisters, daughters, you have women in your life. And they deserve protection, right? We all deserve some level of protection. And the sport deserves protection. It's not just about you having to take on the sins of other people, but if you want to have a sport to participate in, if you want your family to be safe, is it fair? No, there's lots of things that aren't fair. I talk about this in self-defense courses I do. It's not fair that we can't walk down a spooky alley at 3 a.m. and feel safe. It sucks that we're not allowed to do that. But that's reality, and we have to deal with reality rather than what's fair. If we want to protect the things that we have, We have to protect the things that we have, or we will lose them. So no, it is not our fault, but we have an opportunity. And especially, what are we doing? We're doing jiu-jitsu. We're doing this martial art. There's
what
supposed
is the
to
point
be this,
of this if not to defend people?
yeah,
That's
what the fuck are we doing? Right. So yeah, stand up. You don't have to jiu-jitsu them, but for fuck's sake, like, take a stand against some of this stuff. There's no reason for it to continue to go on.
Yeah. That's the old Jocko Willink thing, right? The extreme ownership thing. It might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility, right? And if you want to be a leader, you have to own the problems that aren't even your problems. You have to make them yours so that you can fix them. And so yes, it is absolutely true that, you as a good dude are probably, not the problem here, but the end result is you are in a unique position to fix the problem. And you should do that, right? If we're all training martial arts for a reason, because we wanted to get something out of this. Most likely we wanted to be the kind of person who could defend themselves and the people around them. Otherwise, I don't understand what the sport is for. There's way better ways to get in shape, right? You can go run on an elliptical. It's going to be a lot easier and you're going to have a lot less broken bones and stuff and injuries than if you train jiu-jitsu. So if you're doing this, it's because there's part of you that likes to fight. And if you want to fight, I'm hoping it's because you want to be the kind of person who can defend yourself and those around you. So,
right.
Yeah. I think the big takeaway that I'm getting out of this chat, Jesse, from you is that we as people who train this kind of stuff, we cannot allow the bad stuff to become normalized. It is not normal, right? Whether we're talking about bullshit fake black belts or scammy grifters or, sexual abusers in the sport or allowing neo-Nazis just wander in here and make jiu-jitsu their own. When we are silent and we say and do nothing, we basically cede the territory to them. And that whether we think so or not, that does impact us, because ceding territory to extremists and predators has never turned out well for anybody.
No, absolutely not. We do not give predators an inch, period. They get no more territory from us. It has to stop.
Well, I guess that's probably as good a place as any to tie up here. If people want to come check out the new gym, Jesse, are we in a state now where they can do that? Is there a target date when people should show up?
No, we are open. Come find us. Yeah, we're open. We're bringing new students in, and we're going to have a more official kind of grand reopening probably in about a month once we got all the little kinks and stuff worked out. But no, visitors are coming. We've got new students coming in. So if you're in the Louisville, Kentucky area, visiting, looking for a new gym, whatever, we would love to see you. Come visit us. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. If people want to look up the gym, like either the website or to hit you up on Instagram or something and ask you questions, how do they do that?
Yeah, we're at roughhandsbjj.com, roughhandsbjj on all the socials. All the information's there. Reach out to us. Anything we talk about on the show, anything about training jiu-jitsu, we'd love to chat.
Amazing. Well, you're easy to find. Great chat, Jesse. Always love having these conversations with you.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, it's like a current events episode. We got to cover a lot of stuff all in one go here.
Yeah, it was a real shotgun blast.
Awesome. Well, thanks, buddy. Thanks to everyone listening as well. You guys all take care.
Thanks, everyone.